Who were the people who gathered on a lonely hill over 11,000 years ago, long before farming, writing, or cities existed? What vision led them to carve towering stones and create the sacred wonder we now call Göbekli Tepe? Tonight, we follow their footsteps into the origins and mysteries of the world's first temple builders. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. The hill where time first stirred. Before cities rose from the earth, before kings carved their names into stone, before writing, farming, metalwork, or monuments existed, there was a quiet hill in the Anatolian highlands. A hill shaped by wind, by seasons, by the slow migration of ancient herds. A place that seemed ordinary until the day humanity left its first great mark upon it. This is Göbekli Tepe, a site older than the oldest cities, older than pottery, older than the very idea of settled life. And here, on this gentle rise of land, time itself feels as though it first began to stir. Imagine the landscape as it looked more than 11,000 years ago. The air is cooler than it is now, touched with the final breath of the Ice Age. Rolling plains stretch outward in every direction, painted with soft grasses and scattered shrubs. Wild gazelle move in graceful arcs across the open steppe. Scattered almonds and pistachio trees sway lightly in the breeze. Groups of ancient aurochs, powerful ancestors of cattle, graze near distant slopes. Wolves pad silently across the hillsides, their movements blending into the muted tones of stone and soil. And there, rising from this calm expanse, stands a hill that feels quiet, unassuming, and yet strangely important. A rounded mound, shaped not by human hands at first, but by nature. The wind carries the scent of earth and wildflowers. The world is peaceful, unmarked by walls or towers or roads. There is no smoke of cities, no sound of tools, no echo of crowds. The only voices belong to the wind, the animals, and the small groups of humans who wander through the plains in loose clusters. Hunters, gatherers, storytellers, families. These early people do not live here permanently. They move with seasons, following herds, gathering wild grains, collecting fruits. Their footprints are light upon the land. Yet when they approach this particular hill, something about it draws their attention. Perhaps it is the way the horizon meets its curve. Perhaps it is the vantage it offers across the surrounding world. Perhaps it is something older, something instinctive, a feeling that this place holds meaning even before meaning has the chance to take root. Walk with them now as they climb the gentle slope. Their steps barely disturb the soil. Their clothing is made of hides, softened and worn by constant use. They carry stone tools chipped carefully by hand. They speak in languages forever lost to time, their words shaped by need, by kinship, by the stories passed down around nighttime fires. These communities understand their environment intimately. Every change in the wind, every shift in animal behaviour, every sign written in the tracks on the ground. As they reach the top of the hill, the view opens widely before them. The plains glow under the rising sun. Shadows stretch long and thin across the land. To the north, rugged mountains stand silent. To the south, the terrain softens into rolling hills that seem to drift endlessly toward the horizon. Something about this place encourages gathering. People sit, they share food, they exchange stories, they watch the migration of animals far below. They observe the stars that emerge over the hilltop, night after night. Generation after generation, they return to this spot, until eventually the hill becomes more than a landmark. It becomes a meeting place, a place where memory settles, where meaning begins to collect like sediment, and slowly, across centuries, an idea takes shape. At first, the idea is only a thought, a feeling, a sense that the hill should hold something more permanent than fire circles and temporary shelters. It is a place that seems to deserve form, shape, stone, something lasting. And so, with no agriculture, no metal tools, no wheels, no beasts of burden, these early people do something extraordinary. They begin to carve, walk through the early camp they set on the hilltop. Stones lie everywhere, broken from larger blocks. Tools made from flint and obsidian sit in small clusters. Groups of workers gather around a massive limestone slab still half buried in the earth. They strike the stone with careful rhythmic motions. Dust rises, chips fall. Slowly, the shape begins to emerge, a shape the world has never seen before. A towering T-shaped pillar. It is not random, it is not accidental, it is deliberate, intentional, symbolic. The people carve it taller than any person, as high as a standing tree. They smooth its sides, they shape its edges, and when it is ready, they raise it upright, a monumental act for a mobile pre-agricultural society. But this pillar is only the beginning. Around it more stones rise. Massive pillars form circles, each one carefully positioned. Some are plain, others carry carved images. Foxes, snakes, wild boars, cranes, lions, scorpions, vultures. These animals are familiar to the people who built them. They share the land, the water sources, the world. Their presence carved into stone suggests stories, beliefs, fears, and hopes. The hill begins to change. No longer just a natural rise, it becomes a sacred space, a gathering place, transformed by human hands. People now approach it not merely as a place of good views or friendly gatherings, but as something closer to a sanctuary, a place where the living come together perhaps to honour the forces that shape their world. The wind moves through the spaces between the pillars, carrying sounds softly through the stone rings. Firelight dances at night, throwing shadows of carved animals onto the limestone surfaces. People sit in circles, listening to elders who speak of spirits, of seasons, of mysteries they cannot yet name. The stone rings become a stage for memory, for ceremony, for connection. We do not know exactly what these early builders believed. No writing exists to explain their thoughts. But the pillars themselves, massive, carefully carved, arranged with purpose, speak with their own quiet certainty. A belief was present, a purpose was shared, a vision was formed long before farming or cities existed. Walk closer to one of the pillars. You feel the coolness of the stone beneath your hand. The carved images seem to watch silently. Their simplicity and elegance evoke a language older than words. This is the heart of the hill, a mark of humanity's earliest attempt to shape the world through meaning rather than survival. As centuries pass, the site grows. New rings of pillars are built. Old ones are buried intentionally. Stone enclosures rise, collapse, and rise again. The hill becomes layered, not by erosion, but by human intention. Generation after generation returns, adding to the memory of the place, layering it with stone, with earth, with rituals now forgotten. Eventually, long after its peak, long after the builders have moved toward new ways of living, farming, herding, settling, the site is buried completely, not by neglect or abandonment, but by careful covering. Soil is carried, packed, pressed, until the pillars lie beneath a man-made hill. Perhaps they buried it to protect it. Perhaps its purpose had been fulfilled. Perhaps new beliefs emerged, but the burial preserved it more completely than any ruin left open to the weather. For thousands of years, Göbekli Tepe slept beneath this hill. Seasons passed over it. Empires rose and fell. Roads were built and forgotten. Cities flourished and crumbled, all while the stone circles remained in silence, hidden under earth, untouched, waiting for the world to become ready to see them again. And then, in the 20th century, the hills stirred once more. Archaeologists brushed away soil, stone edges emerged, carvings took shape, sunlight touched the pillars again after 11 millennia, and the world realised that something extraordinary had been uncovered. The oldest monumental site humans had ever built. The hill that once watched ancient hunters return season after season now watched modern researchers gather with tools, notebooks and cameras. The same gentle winds moved across its surface. The same horizon stretched out in quiet majesty. Göbekli Tepe had awakened, not to reveal all its secrets, but to remind us that even at the dawn of our species, long before we understood civilization, we already understood meaning. And as the sun lowers over the Anatolian plains, the pillars stand once more in the soft evening light, silent, enduring, symbols of a time when humanity first realized it could shape stone, shape places, shape memory, and perhaps even shape the beginning of history itself. Hunters, gatherers, and the first visionaries. Long before the first stones of Göbekli Tepe were raised, before the pillars took shape beneath skilled hands, a different world existed across the hills and plains of ancient Anatolia. It was a world without villages, without walls, without carved monuments or planted fields. A world carried on the backs of wandering groups, families who lived by following the rhythms of the land. These were hunters and gatherers, people who moved with the seasons, people whose footsteps traced patterns lost to time, but whose quiet ingenuity would one day reshape human history. Imagine their world as it was 12,000 years ago. The climate is gentler than during the heights of the Ice Age. The land is a mosaic of rolling hills, grassy fields, and scattered woodlands. Herds of gazelle move with graceful coordination, shadows rippling across the plains as they race in unison. Wild cattle, immense and powerful, graze near water sources. Flocks of birds rise in great spirals, filling the sky with soft motion. The air is cool, fragrant with the scent of earth still wet from morning dew, and moving through this vast landscape are small human groups, no larger than a few extended families. They travel lightly, carrying only what is needed. Their shelters are temporary, easily assembled and taken down. Their tools fit neatly into leather bags, stone blades, flint scrapers, bone needles, woven baskets. Each item is simple, functional, shaped by hands that understand their craft intimately. They are not primitive. They are practiced. Their knowledge of the land is precise. Walk with them now, in the soft morning light. Their footsteps fall gently on the earth as they make their way across a valley. Children run ahead, laughing quietly, searching for berries or bright stones to add to small collections tied at their waists. Adults walk steadily, scanning the horizon for animal tracks or signs of weather. Elders move at their own pace, carried not by speed but by wisdom, the memory of many past seasons guiding their choices. Their world is not empty or silent. It is full of meaning. Every trail tells a story. Every shift in the wind has significance. Every change in the behaviour of animals signals something important. These hunters and gatherers do not impose ideas on the land. They read it, understand it, move with it, and in doing so, they survive with remarkable balance. As the group stops near a cluster of wild almond trees, women begin to gather the ripened nuts, placing them in woven baskets. The men move toward a nearby slope where fresh gazelle tracks appear. They crouch low, examining the prints, depth, spacing, direction, reading them like a kind of ancient script. Their movements are quiet, coordinated, shaped by generations of teaching. When they hunt, they do so with precision. When they gather, they do so with care. When they rest, they share food, stories, and songs. And in the evenings, when the sun begins to sink below distant hills, the camp comes alive with soft conversation. Fires crackle, sparks drift upward. The smell of roasted meat and crushed herbs fills the air. Children sit close to their parents. Elders speak slowly, their voices carrying memory like a gentle current flowing through the night. It is here, among these stories and shared experiences, that ideas begin to form. Ideas older than writing, older than agriculture, older than structures carved from stone. Ideas about the world, ideas about the unseen, ideas about connections between people, animals and the land, sit now beside their fire. A storyteller gestures toward the darkness beyond the camp's edge. She speaks of the spirits that guide animals across the plains. She speaks of ancestors who watch from the stars. She speaks of places on the land that carry special power, places where the boundary between the visible world and the hidden world feels thinner. One of these places is a hill not far from their migrations, a hill that offers a wide view of the surrounding plains, a hill where herds often pass, a hill where the sunrise feels different, warmer, sharper, more alive. This hill, known today as Göbekli Tepe, is not yet a sanctuary of stone, but it is already a place of gatherings, a place where different groups meet to share food, exchange tools, select mates, cement alliances, and participate in rituals older than memory. At times of the year when gazelle herds swell into great numbers, many groups arrive on the hill. Fires multiply, camps merge, the quiet rhythms of daily life shift into something grander, a celebration of survival, abundance, and unity. The hill becomes a meeting ground, a crossroads, a place where connections grow, and as more groups gather here, a new kind of thinking emerges, something collaborative, something far-reaching. These people begin to imagine the hill not only as a temporary site for seasonal gatherings, but as a place worthy of something lasting. The first visionaries are among them, not rulers, not architects, but individuals who see patterns where others see randomness. People who feel that the world around them holds messages waiting to be expressed. People who imagine taking the stone beneath their feet and shaping it into something larger than themselves. But even before they carve, they prepare. Walk with them as they scout the area around the hill for suitable stone. Limestone lies beneath the surface, soft enough to shape, strong enough to stand. They mark the ground with small stones. They test blocks by tapping them with flint hammers, listening for the right sound. They learn where the earth yields easily and where it resists. This knowledge is not accidental. It is shared slowly, carefully. It grows across generations. The groups begin to work together in ways they never have before. People who once travelled independently now collaborate to move immense stones. They coordinate hunts to feed larger gatherings. They develop new forms of cooperation, not for survival alone, but for creation. The first visionaries do not build alone. They guide, inspire, observe. They point to shapes hidden inside the stone, shapes of animals, shapes of standing figures, shapes of pillars unlike anything ever made before, and the community listens. They trust the storytellers, the healers, the elders, the hunters who know the land best. They trust the sense of meaning that seems to emanate from the hill. Slowly, intentionally, their efforts shift from temporary shelters and stone tools to something unprecedented. Monuments meant to last. Walk toward the hill as work begins. Dozens of people gather around a large limestone outcrop. They chip, carve, shape. Shards of stone scatter across the ground. Children watch, learning the motions that will one day be theirs. Elders advise. Hunters bring fresh meat to the workers. Gatherers collect nuts, berries and roots to keep the camp nourished. The sound of stone meeting stone becomes a constant rhythm, a heartbeat rising from the hillside. This is the first spark of the monumental world, the dawn of architecture, the quiet awakening of a new chapter in human history. And it begins not with farmers or kings or cities, but with wandering families who carried nothing more than stone tools, deep memory, and a capacity for shared imagination. These hunters and gatherers, mobile, resourceful, observant, were the first visionaries. They were the ones who saw the hill not merely as part of the land, but as a place where meaning could be carved into permanence. Their lives were simple, but their ideas were vast. Their tools were basic, but their collaboration was sophisticated. Their world had no cities, but it had stories powerful enough to call stones upright and place them in circles that would outlast every empire yet to come. As the sun sets across the plains, their camp quiets. Firelight flickers against the stone blocks waiting to be shaped. The wind carries the scent of earth and smoke. Families settle into rest. The hill stands silent, holding the earliest hints of the monumental dream that will unfold in the centuries ahead. And in this moment of quiet, under a sky filled with ancient stars, humanity stands on the threshold of something new, something enduring, something profound. The people who wander these lands, who follow herds and gather wild grains, are the ones who will soon raise the pillars of Göbekli Tepe. They are the first builders, the first collaborators, the first visionaries. And on this hill, time itself begins to take its first deliberate shape. Stones that rose before cities existed, before the first cities rose across the ancient world, before walls enclosed communities or kings inscribed their names into stone, there were pillars standing on a quiet hill, pillars shaped by hands that had never known settled life. These stones at Göbekli Tepe, older than pottery, older than metal, older than the wheel, were lifted by societies who still wandered with the seasons. Their existence challenges everything we once believed about the timeline of human civilization. Imagine the landscape again in its untouched form. Rolling plains shimmering under a pale morning sun, flocks of birds turning gently in the sky, the wind brushing soft patterns through grass that stretches in all directions. No roads cut across the land, no buildings rise from the earth, only nature, vast and open, and the people who move lightly across it. Yet on one hill, something unusual begins to appear. From a distance, the first stones look like natural outcrops, but as you approach, their shapes become unmistakable. Tall pillars, carved with deliberate lines, arranged in circles that seem too precise to be accidental. These stones did not rise by themselves. They were carved, shaped, lifted, and placed by early humans at a time when such an achievement seemed impossible. Walk closer now. Dust lies lightly across the surface of the limestone. The morning sun glances off pale edges, revealing smooth faces and sharp corners untouched by erosion. These stones do not resemble anything else made in their era. They are tall, T-shaped monoliths, some towering more than 5 meters high, each weighing several tons, and they were raised by people with no beasts of burden, no pulleys, no metal, and no permanent settlements. It is easy to imagine later civilizations building with stone, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Minoans, but Göbekli Tepe predates them all by thousands of years. The stones here were erected long before writing existed, long before agriculture took root, long before the idea of kingship or organized religion took form, and yet the craftsmanship is astonishingly advanced. Run your hand along the surface of one pillar. It is smooth, almost polished, shaped with tools made only of flint and determination. The edges are crisp, the planes are straight, the silhouette is unmistakable, a shape reminiscent of a human figure without features, a kind of symbolic presence. Some pillars bear carved arms, hands, belts, and even garments, details that hint at a sophisticated understanding of form and symbolism. Nearby, another pillar stands adorned with intricate animal carvings. foxes leaping across stone, snakes winding in elegant curves, cranes standing tall and watchful. Each animal is carved with confidence, with a sense of motion frozen in time. These carvings were not decorative, they were meaningful, perhaps telling stories, marking rituals, or symbolizing the powers believed to inhabit the land. Pause for a moment and imagine the people who carved them. Their tools were simple, their knowledge passed orally through generations, yet they shaped stone with remarkable precision, removing layers in thin, even slices, smoothing surfaces until they gleamed, carving reliefs that still captivate the eye today. Consider how much planning was required to place these stones. A single pillar might weigh as much as a small elephant. To move it, dozens of people would have needed ropes twisted from fibres, tree trunks used as rollers, carefully coordinated effort and extraordinary patience. They would carve the pillar out of the bedrock, separate it carefully, and then drag it across the ground toward the circle where it belonged. At the centre of each enclosure, two taller pillars stood facing each other, guardians of the circle, symbols of something profound. Their exact meaning is lost to time, but their placement is intentional, aligned with the shape of the enclosure and perhaps with the horizon or stars. Imagine the construction scene. Groups gather around the newly carved stone. Voices rise and fall in low tones. Hunters who tracked gazelle just days before now work alongside artisans who shape stone and gatherers who carry water and food for the workers. Children watch from a distance, absorbing the movements they will one day replicate. The community shares not only labour, but purpose, a sense that these stones matter, that they carry something larger than the individuals who raise them. The hill becomes alive with activity. Stone dust drifts into the air. The rhythm of hammering echoes across the plains. Fires burn to keep tools sharp, with flint knappers seated beside piles of stone shards. Food is cooked, shared, eaten, as people rest briefly before returning to their work. The atmosphere is focused but not rushed. These are not builders under command, they are participants in a communal vision. As each pillar rises, the space transforms. What was once open sky becomes a circle of towering forms. Shadows fall in new patterns. Sunlight filters between the stones, creating shifting shapes on the ground. At night, firelight casts flickering images of the carved animals, making them appear almost alive. The people gather within these circles, not to live, but to come together for moments that echoed with meaning. We do not know what rituals occurred here. We do not know who led them. We do not know the exact beliefs behind the carvings, but we know this. These stones were made with intention. These circles were meant to gather people. This hill became a place where early humans expressed something deeply human, the desire to mark their world with symbols, to build spaces for meaning, to turn imagination into form. As more stones rise, the site grows. Circle after circle emerges across the hilltop, each containing pillars arranged with care. Some are small and intimate, others are grand, towering above the people who stand within them. The labour behind this construction spans generations. Older circles are filled with soil and intentionally buried so that new ones can be built. The hill grows not only in height but in memory, a layered archive of early human creativity. It is important to remember that these builders were not farmers. They had not yet settled into villages. Their world was still fluid, still shaped by migration. They lived in a time when survival depended on movement, observation, improvisation. Yet these same people built the earliest monumental structures known to humanity. This reveals something extraordinary. The desire to create meaning through architecture preceded agriculture. Collaboration on massive projects existed before permanent homes. Monuments came before cities. The stones of Göbekli Tepe stand as the first known example of humans reshaping the landscape, not for survival, but for purpose. Walk through the site once more. The morning sun casts long shadows behind the pillars. Light collects in the hollows of carved figures. The limestone gleams softly in gold hues. Birds perch briefly on the tops of pillars before taking flight across the plains. The air is still, quiet, as if the hill itself is remembering the hands that once shaped it. In this calm moment, the stones feel like ancient witnesses, standing silently through thousands of years, watching as humanity changed from wanderers to farmers, from families to villages, from small societies to vast civilizations. And yet these stones rose before all of that. They remind us that human imagination was powerful long before cities existed. That cooperation among early people was more advanced than we once believed. That creativity is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than the carved images that would one day fill temples across the world. The stones of Göbekli Tepe are not relics of early civilization. They are the roots of it. They stand as timeless expressions of a moment when humanity first began to understand its ability to shape the world, not through necessity, but through vision. And as the sun settles once more, casting a warm glow across the ancient hill, the pillars remain, still, enduring, bearing silent testimony to the ingenuity of people who lived in a world without cities, yet built something that would outlast them all. Circles of carved animals and silent stories on the quiet hill of Göbekli Tepe, long before cities were born or writing took shape, early humans carved a world they understood deeply into the surfaces of stone. These carvings, foxes, snakes, cranes, boars, lions, vultures, scorpions, are echoes of a time when animals guided human life, imagination, and belief. The circles of pillars that once stood on this hill were not blank or silent. They were alive with images, symbols, and stories preserved in limestone for over 11,000 years. Walk slowly through the ancient stone circles. The ground is soft with dust, the air still, the light gentle as it falls across the pale surfaces of the pillars. Each enclosure feels like a world of its own. Some stones stand tall and imposing, others shorter and more intimate, all arranged in deliberate patterns, and on their surfaces, carved with steady hands thousands of years ago, the animals wait, frozen in mid-motion, watching across time. Approach the first pillar. A fox runs across its face, carved in clean, fluid lines. Its body is long, lean, purposeful. The fox was a familiar creature to the people who built this place. It moved through the hills and valleys silently, confident and clever. Perhaps it symbolized cunning, guidance, or the spirit world. Perhaps it was a protector or messenger. We cannot know for certain, but its presence carved so boldly suggests that it held meaning that reached beyond its physical form. Move to the next stone. Here, a snake winds its sinuous shape down the pillar's surface. Its curves are smooth, its head delicately raised. Snakes appear on many stones at Göbekli Tepe, sometimes alone, sometimes intertwined with other figures. They may have held symbolic power, creatures of the earth, embodiments of cycles, renewal, danger, or transformation. These early humans would have known snakes well, watched their movements, respected their presence. The carving feels both careful and reverent, as though capturing not just the animal, but the idea behind it. Continue through the circle. A crane stands tall, its legs long and elegant. Cranes still migrate across this region today, their calls echoing through the sky as they move in sweeping formations. To the ancient builders, cranes may have represented connection between seasons, between lands, between distant groups who followed similar paths. Their image carved into stone hints at an understanding of the world that extended far beyond the local landscape. Further along, a wild boar appears. Its body is thick and powerful, muscles carved with deliberate strokes. Boars were dangerous animals to hunt, demanding agility, strength, teamwork. They fed families, shaped survival, and perhaps represented both risk and reward. To carve such a creature into a pillar is to acknowledge its place in the human story, a story of challenge, sustenance, and respect. And then there are the lions. One pillar bears the Faint outline of a lion, its form stylized but unmistakable. Lions were apex predators of the ancient Near East, symbols of strength and dominance. To carve a lion on a pillar may have communicated power, not human power, but the power of the natural world, the forces early humans sought to understand and honour. But perhaps the most striking carvings of all are the vultures. On several stones, vultures stand with wings open. On one, a vulture holds what appears to be a sphere, or perhaps a head. These images are mysterious, haunting, deeply symbolic. In many ancient Near Eastern cultures, vultures were associated with death and the transition between life and the afterlife. They were seen as guides, as participants in a process humans could not control but could acknowledge. At Göbekli Tepe, the vultures suggest ritual. They suggest beliefs deeper than survival. They suggest that this hill was not simply a meeting place, it was a ceremonial space. Walk further into another enclosure. Here, on one of the central pillars, carved arms run down the sides. A belt wraps around the stone's midsection, and beneath the belt, a fox pelt hangs. This pillar is not simply a shape, it is a stylized being, a representation of a figure, perhaps human or perhaps something beyond human. The fox pelt carved on its belt hints at costume, ritual attire, or identity. These central pillars may have represented ancestral beings, spirits, guardians, or legendary figures remembered through oral tradition. Stand in the centre of the stone circle. The pillars surrounding you watch silently. Their carvings face inward, as though ready to address those who once gathered here. The animals on the pillars are not arranged randomly. They seem to interact. A snake near a boar, a fox running alongside a bird, creatures grouped in patterns that suggest narratives now forgotten. It is possible these are scenes from stories told around fires long before the stones were carved. It is possible they represent constellations, mapping the night sky through earthly forms. It is possible they served as symbolic markers for clans, groups, or roles within the community. But whatever their purpose, the carvings echo with intention. Each line carved into stone required patience. Each figure required skill. Each pillar required vision. These were not decorations. These were messages. The people who carved them lived in a world where animals shaped daily life. They hunted them, feared them, admired them, depended on them. In their stories, animals likely held voices, personalities, powers, and at Göbekli Tepe, these beliefs took their first monumental form, images large enough to be seen from across the enclosure, lasting enough to survive thousands of years beneath the earth. Walk slowly around the circle once more. Notice the texture of the carvings, smooth in some places, rough in others. The stone holds marks of tools long vanished. The wear of time has softened edges, but the figures remain clear. They were carved deeply, intentionally, confident in their lines. As the sun shifts across the sky, shadows deepen around the animals. The fox seems to move with the shadows. The snake looks more alive as the light changes. The crane's long legs stretch further across the pillar's surface. These animals were carved to be seen in natural light, to interact with the passing of the day, to speak through shadow and brightness. Perhaps the early visitors stood inside these circles at sunrise, watching light flow across the carved creatures. Perhaps they gathered at dusk, telling stories as firelight flickered against the pillars. Perhaps each animal had a role in ritual songs now lost, or in ceremonies that marked transitions in life. The stones feel timeless, but the stories they carry were once alive, spoken in voices that echoed softly within these very circles. Move to a different enclosure. Here, the carvings include not only animals, but symbols, abstract shapes, patterns, signs, whose meanings elude modern interpretation. Some resemble H shapes, some circles, some crescents, some sequences of dots. These may have represented ideas, directions, seasons, or forces of nature. The combination of animals and symbols hints at a complex system of meaning, perhaps an early form of symbolic communication thousands of years older than writing. The people who made these carvings did not leave written texts, but their worldview is etched into these stones. Their fears, their hopes, their beliefs, all captured in silent images. As you stand in the centre of the enclosure, surrounded by pillars rising like guardians, you feel the quiet weight of these ancient stories. The wind moves through the site, carrying the same sound it carried thousands of years ago. The land stretches open in every direction, bathed in gentle light. The carvings remain still, patient, enduring. These animals no longer roam the plains in such abundance. Some have vanished entirely. Others live only in remote regions. But here, carved into the stone of Göbekli Tepe, they remain as they once were, central to human life, central to human imagination. The circles of carved animals hold silent stories, stories of a time before civilization, stories expressed not through words, but through images as old as human memory. They remind us that before humans built cities, they built meaning. Before they farmed, they imagined. Before they wrote, they carved. These stones rose before cities existed, but the stories carved upon them carried the seeds of culture, belief, and symbolism that would one day shape the entire world. As the day ends and the light softens, the animals on the pillars seem to retreat into shadow, just as they once retreated into the twilight landscapes around the builders' camps. The hill grows quiet again, the wind brushing softly over carved stone, and the silent stories carved by ancient hands continue to wait, patient and enduring, for those who walk among the circles of Göbekli Tepe, listening for echoes of the world's first symbols etched into stone. The builders who shaped sacred stone. Long before machines, before metal chisels, before pulleys or wheels, people walked across the plateau of southeastern Anatolia, carrying only the simplest of tools: flint blades, wooden levers, ropes twisted from plant fibres, and strength drawn from shared purpose. Yet with these alone, they shaped monuments that would stand for more than 11,000 years. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not farmers, nor citizens of a settled world. They were hunter-gatherers who moved with the seasons, following animal migrations and ripening plants. And yet, somehow, these wandering communities managed to carve massive stones, transport them across uneven terrain, and raise them into towering formations. It is one of the earliest examples of organised human engineering, long before the idea of civilization had even been imagined. Walk again across the sunlit hill. The limestone bedrock lies close beneath the soil, pale and sturdy, almost inviting the first cut of a stone tool. This kind of rock is workable, yet strong, the perfect material for the enormous T-shaped pillars. It is easy to imagine the builders discovering this stone early on, testing it with a flint blade, hearing the crisp sound as a shard of limestone fell away. They would have recognised its potential immediately. Imagine the work beginning. A small group kneels beside the bedrock, scraping away the topsoil with long wooden tools. Others inspect the rock, planning where the next pillar will be carved. There is no writing, no blueprint, no measuring systems. Yet their work is deliberate and coordinated. They understand the stone's grain, its weight, its natural lines. They seem to know exactly what shape lies hidden below the surface. One builder takes a flint blade, sharp and glass-like, and begins striking the stone in rhythmic taps. Each strike removes a thin slice. Gradually, the outline of a pillar emerges, a long shaft topped with a broad crosspiece, the simple but powerful T-shape that defines Göbekli Tepe's monumental architecture. Hours pass, days pass. The stone slowly reveals itself, its edges smoothed, its surface is flattened by constant scraping. The act of shaping these pillars was slow, repetitive, meditative. Even today, archaeologists marvel at the skill required. Limestone is not difficult to cut, but to shape it evenly, symmetrically, and at such scale requires an intimate understanding of both material and motion. These ancient builders had no polished bronze tools, no iron chisels, only determination, technique, and shared experience passed down through generations. As the pillar nears completion, the workers begin separating it from the bedrock. Wedges are hammered into narrow grooves. Wooden levers pry the stone upward. The entire community gathers to help, pushing, lifting, guiding. When the pillar finally breaks free, it rests heavily on the ground, its full weight felt in the earth beneath it. Some pillars weigh several tons. Moving them requires cooperation. Dozens of people pulling on ropes, rolling the stone over logs, adjusting its direction inch by inch. Picture the procession. Dozens of people tugging thick ropes woven from plant fibres. Others guide the stone's movement, shouting soft instructions. Children carry water, food, and tools to keep the group going. The sun arcs overhead as the stone slowly crosses the hill. They move with care, aware that a misplaced step or uneven roll could cause the pillar to crack. Every movement is coordinated, every gesture intentional. This is a community effort, not commanded by a ruler, but motivated by collective belief. When the pillar arrives at the circular enclosure, the builders prepare the foundation. A hole is dug deep enough to anchor the stone. Stones and packed earth are arranged to stabilize it. Wooden supports hold the pillar upright during the raising process. Then comes the most difficult moment, lifting the pillar into place. Groups pull ropes from opposite sides. Others push with wooden beams. The stone rises slowly, inch by inch. Dust swirls beneath it. Voices call out in rhythm. The air fills with tension, a shared breath held across the circle. And then, with a final heave, the pillar stands. Strong, straight, imposing. The builders step back and look at their work, the stone towering above them like a guardian. They adjust the soil around its base, pack it tightly, test its solidity, and admire the transformation of the landscape they know so well. But their work does not end with architecture. Now the stone becomes a canvas. Some builders begin carving. Flint blades scrape, chip, and score the surface. They carve animals, symbols, and shapes that hold meaning understood by their community. They carve belts, hands, arms, transforming the pillars into stylized beings. The carvings require finesse, smooth motion, and knowledge of depth. One wrong stroke could distort the entire design. Imagine the concentration, the quiet focus, the steady breath of the carver, the gathering of others to watch the patterns emerge. These carvings are not rushed. They unfold slowly, layer by layer, revealing creatures of the land, foxes, snakes, cranes, animals that shared the world with the builders. Whether these images were meant to tell stories, record rituals, or call upon powers we no longer understand, they were carved with reverence. Once the carvings are complete, the circle becomes a living space, not for daily life, but for gatherings. Rituals were almost certainly held here, although their nature is lost to time. Perhaps they celebrated the hunt, perhaps they honoured spirits, perhaps they gathered to remember stories passed down through countless generations. In raising these stones, the builders transformed not only the hill but themselves. Such construction required community, cooperation, shared belief. People who once lived loosely connected were now gathering in larger numbers. To build a site like Göbekli Tepe, people had to organise, plan, innovate. This kind of work may have laid the foundations for civilization itself. It encouraged deeper social bonds, division of labour, and long-term vision. It required leadership, not by force, but by influence. It taught humans to build not just shelters but symbols. The builders of Göbekli Tepe stood at the turning point between a world defined by movement and a future defined by settlement. Though they still followed the migrations of animals, they now returned to this hill repeatedly to build, to carve, to gather. Their hands shaped more than stone. They shaped the beginnings of structured human society. Walk once more through the enclosure. The pillars stand silent now, but they remember the sound of tools, the hum of voices, the shared effort that raised them. The carvings still hold the marks of ancient blades, each line a testament to patience. The air still carries echoes of ritual steps, spoken words, firelight flickering across carved stone. The techniques they used were simple, but their vision was extraordinary. The tools were humble, but the results monumental. Their world was small in scale, yet vast in imagination. These builders never saw a city, never heard of kingdoms or empires, never imagined the written word, and yet they built something that would last longer than any early city, outlasting countless empires and cultures, surviving untouched beneath the earth for thousands of years. In shaping sacred stone, they shaped the future, a quiet beginning to a story that would lead to agriculture, settlements, monuments, and the civilizations that followed. Their tools have vanished, their rituals forgotten, their voices silent, but their stones remain, patient, enduring, and deeply human. Life around the sacred hill, long before the first fields were ploughed or the first village walls were raised, life around Göbekli Tepe unfolded in quiet rhythms shaped by the land, the seasons, and the movement of animals across the open plains. The people who gathered at the sacred hill did not live there permanently. They arrived, stayed for a time, and drifted on when the landscape called them elsewhere. Yet each return strengthened their bond to the place, weaving it into the pattern of their lives. Imagine the land stretching in every direction, rolling plains softened by wild grasses, scattered shrubs bending gently in the wind, distant hills rising in pale silhouettes. Water flowed through seasonal streams, filling shallow basins after winter rains. In spring, the world came alive. Flowers opened along the slopes, gazelles gathered in great herds, and birds filled the sky with their calls. This was the world of the builders, a world where survival depended on attentiveness to nature's cycles. As the community approached Göbekli Tepe, their arrival created a small temporary settlement around the hill. There were no permanent houses carved into stone, no streets or courtyards. Instead, simple shelters rose in scattered clusters, light, adaptable structures made of wood poles, animal skins, woven reeds and grasses. These shelters stood for days or weeks at a time, then were dismantled and carried away when the people moved on. Walk among these small dwellings, smoke curls softly from hearths. The scent of roasted meat drifts through the air. Children chase each other between shelters, their laughter mixing with the crackle of fire. Women grind seeds and nuts with stone tools, their hands practiced and steady. Men return in groups, carrying the results of the day's hunt. Gazelle, boar, birds, sometimes even wild cattle. Their diet is shaped by the land. Gazelle meat is roasted slowly over coals. Bones are cracked to reach marrow. Wild plants fill baskets. Almonds, pistachios, lentils. Wild wheat gathered in handfuls. Tubers pulled from the ground. Bitter herbs mixed with meat. Berries mashed and dried in the sun. Nothing is wasted. Everything has purpose. Nearby, others prepare stone tools. Flint knappers sit with pieces of stone in their laps, striking and shaping blades for carving, cutting, or scraping. The sound of flint tapping flint echoes gently through the camp, a rhythmic, familiar sound that has shaped countless generations. The community is fluid, but not disorganized. Roles are shared. Knowledge is passed quietly from elders to youth. People collaborate, particularly during large hunts or when shaping massive stones for the enclosures. The sense of unity grows stronger during these gatherings. People who live separately for most of the year come together here, forming a larger social network. Firelight becomes a central presence at night. As darkness settles across the plains, flickering flames cast warm light on the gathered faces. The younger members listen to stories told by older voices, stories of animals, the land, the spirits that moved across the world. These stories are not written or carved, but carried in memory, repeated year after year, and the sacred hill watches over everything. At certain times, groups climb the slope to the enclosures, entering the circles of stone. Perhaps ceremonies were held here, rituals to honour game animals, to mark the seasons, to remember the dead, or to seek guidance from forces they believed shaped their world. Whatever these rituals were, they bound the community together, strengthening the significance of Göbekli Tepe in their lives. Food was often shared during such gatherings. Large feasts likely took place on this hill. Archaeological remains reveal vast quantities of animal bones, evidence of celebrations that required cooperation on a scale far larger than everyday life. Feasting brought people together, supported unity, and turned the hill into a centre of seasonal community life. During the warm months, the landscape provided generously. Herds of gazelle moved through the area. Birds migrated overhead, descending to rest near the streams. Edible plants grew in abundance along the slopes. The people knew where to find everything. They had walked these lands since childhood. Their understanding of the natural world was complete. They saw patterns in the movement of clouds, the ripening of fruit, the behaviour of animals. They recognized the call of each bird, the tracks of each creature written across the soil. Their lives were guided by instinct, experience, and knowledge accumulated through generations of observation. At night, the sky stretched above them like an untouched canvas. The stars were bright, unpolluted by smoke or settlement lights. Constellations drifted slowly overhead, marking time across the year. The people may have seen meaning in the stars, stories of animals and ancestors reflected in the sky just as they were carved into stone. The heavens offered guidance, rhythm, reassurance. It is easy to imagine torches burning at the edges of the enclosures as people gathered inside the circles, their silhouettes dancing softly against the stone. The carved animals on the pillars glowed in the firelight, appearing almost alive. The sacred hill was not a place of fear, it was a place of connection. To each other, to the land, to something greater. Life around Göbekli Tepe was simple in material terms, but rich in social and spiritual depth. Throughout the seasons, families moved across the landscape following food, water, and shelter. Yet this hill remained a fixed point in their year, a gathering place set apart from ordinary life. Its stones anchored memory, its rituals anchored identity, its presence anchored community. When winter approached, the camps quieted. The wind grew colder, the plains changed colour, the people packed their shelters, tools, and baskets. They moved toward lower lands, seeking warmth and resources. Göbekli Tepe stood alone again, silent under falling snow, waiting patiently for their return. Year after year, the cycle continued. Each time the people came back, they found the stones where they left them, steady, familiar, sacred, and as generations passed, the hill became not just a landmark, but a shared story, a shared memory, a shared inheritance. Life around the sacred hill was ever-changing. Göbekli Tepe remained constant, a meeting place, a spiritual centre, a gathering point for early humanity. In the simple rhythms of their lives, the hunts, the meals, the shared laughter, the communal rituals, they laid foundations far deeper than they realised. Their seasonal gatherings would one day contribute to the emergence of permanent settlement, agriculture, and the first roots of civilization. But in this moment, on this quiet hill, life flowed gently around stone and sky, shaped by land, community, and belief, a world suspended between movement and meaning. The first temples of forgotten beliefs, long before priests chanted in stone temples, long before altars burned beneath painted ceilings, long before myths were written into clay or carved into tablets, there was a hill where people gathered beneath the open sky. On this hill, Göbekli Tepe, humanity may have built its first temples, shaped not from the walls of cities, but from the hands of wanderers still learning the shape of their own world. The oldest religious structures known to us do not rise from the heart of a kingdom. They rise from a quiet hill surrounded by wild plains. They rise from people who carried their whole world on their backs. Imagine the landscape again in its earliest days. Wind drifting across grasses that shimmer beneath the sun. Birds circling overhead, gliding on warm currents of air. The occasional gazelle lifting its head to watch the movement of humans in the distance. And at the top of the hill, a collection of stones arranged in circles, each one carved, placed, and honoured by hands long vanished. These circles were not dwellings. They were not workshops. They were not defensive structures. They were something else, something deeply human. Walk slowly toward one of the great enclosures. The stones rise like guardians, forming a space distinct from the land around it. Step inside, and the world changes. Sound softens. The air feels still. The carved animals on the pillars seem to watch from every direction. This space was meant to be entered with awareness. It was meant to gather people, not shelter them. It was meant to mark a boundary between ordinary days and sacred moments. Humanity had not yet created kings, or priests, or cities, but here they created sacred architecture, and through this they revealed the first shimmering outlines of belief. These early temples were places where the community came together to speak to something larger than themselves. Though we cannot know their exact rituals, the stones give us clues, enduring traces of meaning. Stand at the centre between the twin pillars. These two great stones tower above the others, carved with belts, hands and garments. They are not just pillars, they are beings. Their presence suggests guardianship, myth, memory, or the embodiment of ancestral spirits. Perhaps they represented powerful figures in the community's mythology. Perhaps they embodied hunters, protectors, or primordial ancestors. Perhaps they stood as intermediaries between humans and unseen forces. Their purpose is silent, but the reverence with which they were carved speaks loudly. Look around at the surrounding pillars. Each is carved with animals, not random creatures, not simple decorations, but symbols. Foxes running in tense, elegant lines, snakes curling downward as though descending from another realm, vultures stretching their wings wide, lifting what may be spheres, bodies, or the sun itself, boars bristling with strength, cranes walking with long, careful strides. These animals were not just part of the environment, they shaped the worldview of the people. They defined their stories, their fears, their daily survival. To carve an animal into stone was to honour it, to embody its power, to connect the human world to the natural one. The hill itself became a theatre of symbols, an early cosmology etched in limestone. Imagine a gathering at dusk. The plains glow gold as the sun sets. A group approaches the enclosure. Flames flicker in carried torches. Shadows dance against the carved animals. Inside the circle, people sit or stand in quiet anticipation. Their faces lit by firelight, their eyes reflecting the movement of shadow across stone. Perhaps they sang. Perhaps they told stories of ancestors and spirits. Perhaps they reenacted the movements of animals honoured on the pillars. Their rituals may have been simple, a chant, a dance, a shared silence, but their meaning was vast, shaping the identity of the people who created them. The temple was a lens through which they viewed their world. For hunter-gatherers, the environment was alive with signals, the changing positions of stars, the migration of herds, the shifting winds. A sacred site allowed them to organise these observations, to turn natural cycles into shared understanding. Step into another enclosure. This one is partially filled with collapsed stones and drifting soil, but the arrangement remains clear. Again, two central pillars dominate the space. Again, surrounding stones face inward, forming a circle of attention. The circle itself may have held significance, a symbol of continuity, unity, or time's cyclical nature. Circular gathering places appear in cultures across the world, from ancient rings of stones to round council houses. Circles reflect the shape of community itself. No beginning, no end. The builders of Göbekli Tepe may not have had gods as we later imagine them. Their beliefs may have been built around ancestors, spirits, the land, or the animals they carved. But whatever their system, the hill gave it form. This was a place where stories were remembered, where knowledge was shared, where meaning was created. Walking along the edge of the enclosure, imagine the rituals that might have unfolded here. A hunter returns with the pelt of a fox and drapes it on one of the central pillars. A child is brought into the circle for a naming ceremony. A group gathers before a hunt to ask for guidance or blessing. People mourn those who had died during the season, standing beneath the gaze of carved vultures. Each ritual strengthened the bond between the community and the hill. Evidence from the site tells us that feasting took place here. Large gatherings where animals were slaughtered, cooked and shared. Feasts create unity. They draw distant groups together, reinforcing alliances and shared identity. Göbekli Tepe was less a temple in the way we understand temples, and more a gathering point where belief took shape, where cooperation was strengthened, where memory was stored. It was belief that brought people here, belief that inspired them to carve stone, belief that united separate groups under a single purpose. This hill became a centre of gravity for early humanity. Sit quietly in the circle. Feel the weight of the stones around you, their surfaces cool and steady under the soft light. Imagine the murmur of voices, the shifting of firelight, the rhythm of ancient footsteps. The stones do not speak in words, but their silence is full of meaning, the accumulated presence of countless gatherings across centuries. The people who built these enclosures lived in a world without writing, yet here they left a record of their beliefs. They lived in a world without cities, yet here they built monumental architecture. They lived in a world without leaders or kings, yet here they organized themselves to create something enduring. Their beliefs may have been forgotten, but their temples remain, not in ruins of walls, but in circles of stone that still shape our understanding of humanity's earliest spirituality. The first temples were not born in the age of civilization. They came from a world where survival and imagination walked side by side. And on this quiet hill, shaped by ancient hands, we see the earliest traces of humanity reaching for meaning, a desire that would echo across every culture that followed. A world before farming took root, before ploughs carved furrows through the earth, before villages rose from packed mud and stone, before granaries filled with the weight of harvest, humanity lived in a world shaped entirely by nature's pulse. This was the world of the people who gathered at Göbekli Tepe, a world guided by movement, instinct, and cycles older than memory. The plains surrounding the sacred hill stretched wide beneath a vast sky. Wild grasses rippled gently in the wind, shimmering gold in the sun. Herds of gazelle moved across the landscape like living shadows. Birds circled high above, tracking the season's patterns. Water flowed through shallow channels after winter rains, pooling in natural basins that fed both animals and people. In this world, survival required constant awareness, the ability to read tracks in the soil, to understand the movement of herds, to taste which plants were safe, which were bitter, which could heal, and which could harm. Life was fragile, yet exquisitely tuned. Everything that sustained the people came from the land, gathered through shared skill and ancient experience. Yet beneath this rhythm, something was changing. This change did not begin with a single seed planted in soil. It did not come from a sudden idea or a revolutionary discovery. Instead, it emerged slowly, quietly, almost unnoticed, carried by habits repeated across generations. Humans began to form a different kind of relationship with the land, one that would eventually reshape the entire world. Walk now through the early morning landscape. Mist clings to low valleys, dissolving as sunlight warms the grasses. A group of foragers moves carefully through a field of wild wheat and barley. They grasp the stalks gently, pulling them toward woven baskets. Seeds scatter slightly, but mostly remain clutched in clusters. The air holds the soft whisper of grain brushing against skin. These grains were familiar companions. For thousands of years, people had gathered them each season, drying them in the sun, grinding them into coarse flour, mixing them with water, forming cakes baked over open fires. It was a staple not by cultivation, but by careful gathering, a gift returned to year after year. Imagine their hands sorting grains, choosing the plumpest ones, discarding the brittle, the hollow, the unripe. Without knowing it, they were shaping the future of agriculture, selecting traits that would define domesticated wheat. Their choices, repeated season after season, would guide nature into cooperation. But this process was slow, far slower than history often imagines. For centuries, perhaps millennia, people gathered from the same slopes, returning to the same valley floors, developing a memory of the land deeper than any map could capture. Picture the seasonal camp near Göbekli Tepe. Shelters rise lightly against the hillside, framed by wooden poles and covered in woven mats or animal skins. Smoke drifts from hearths. Stone. Tools lie scattered where people sit grinding grains or shaping fresh blades. Children help carry baskets of gathered plants. The air is full of the sounds of work intertwined with soft conversation. Food was varied and abundant. Meat from gazelle, birds, or wild cattle roasted over fires. Nuts and seeds were cracked open with stones. Lentils, chickpeas, and wild roots simmered into thick stews. Honey, found in hollow trees, sweetened the rare moments of celebration. Each season brought different resources, and the people moved accordingly. Nothing was wasted. Every part of the landscape was understood. The behaviour of animals, the ripening of fruits, the appearance of edible leaves after rain. Movement was life, yet movement was not random. Over time, patterns formed, predictable circuits across valleys and hillsides. And at the heart of these circuits stood Göbekli Tepe. The sacred hill did not provide food or water, yet it provided something equally important: meaning and community. Groups who lived apart for much of the year gathered here to share knowledge, stories, tools and rituals. These gatherings strengthened social ties, making cooperation easier in times of need. They also created the conditions that allowed new ideas to spread. Ideas about grains, about plants, about managing the world around them. Imagine a gathering at dusk. People move up the hill carrying torches. The sky deepens from gold to violet. Wind brushes softly across the carved pillars. Fires are lit, revealing the figures of foxes, cranes and snakes etched into the limestone. The stones glow with shifting shadows. Voices merge into steady chants. The atmosphere feels sacred but familiar, a ritual learned across generations. After the gathering, people sit around shared fires to eat. Large haunches of roasted meat are passed from hand to hand. Bowls of ground grains mixed with herbs and water provide sustenance. Steam rises into the cool night air. It is during these moments, shared stories, shared meals, shared labour, that knowledge travels. Someone mentions that a patch of wild barley grew thicker last year near an abandoned camp. Someone else notes that grains sprouted where seeds had fallen during threshing. Another recalls seeing new growth near a water basin used by the group the previous spring. These are not yet farming practices, but they are the beginnings of cultivation. The quiet realization that plants respond to human presence. The seeds scattered during processing take root. Plants grow more densely where people linger. Grains left behind return the next season in greater numbers. This was the dawn of a new relationship between humans and the land. The shift from foraging to cultivation was not a decision. It was a gradual recognition of possibility, something fragile, something intuitive, a sense that the land could become more generous with careful attention, and Göbekli Tepe was central to this process. Construction of the monumental enclosures required stable gatherings. People needed to stay near the hill longer than usual, working side by side for weeks or months. Longer stays encouraged them to make use of nearby grain patches. Longer stays meant more processing of gathered cereals. More processing meant more seeds dropped around camp. Slowly, year after year, those seeds sprouted where humans walked, cooked, rested, and gathered. Walked down the slope as spring turns to early summer. The grasses sway in warm breezes. Pale green shoots cluster in patches where people gathered the year before. These clusters are denser, healthier, easier to harvest. The people notice. They return deliberately to these patches, gathering more grain than before. Over time, they prefer these areas over wilder stands further away. Their movements begin to change, subtly but significantly. Instead of wandering across vast distances, they circle smaller territories. Instead of depending solely on unpredictable wild fields, they rely more on places shaped by human presence. Instead of searching for food, they move between reliable locations, a transition that lays the groundwork for eventual settlement. But make no mistake, they are not farmers. Not yet. They still hunt gazelle, still track migrating herds, still gather roots and fruits in season. But their relationship with plants is shifting steadily from opportunistic gathering to intentional care. This is the world before farming took root, a world of transition, of subtle transformations woven through countless small acts. Imagine a woman sitting beside a grinding stone. Her hands move slowly, rhythmically. The sound of stone against grain fills the air. She tastes the flour, adjusts her technique, teaches her daughter how to hold the tool. This ritual, grinding grain, is one of the earliest forms of cultivation. It binds people to place, to season, to shared labour. Nearby, men butcher animals, slicing meat with flint blades sharpened along the edges. Their work is swift, practiced, necessary. Hunters do not yet realise that their descendants will one day abandon this lifestyle almost entirely in favour of settled life. But that day is far beyond the horizon. For now, the hunters, the gatherers, and the early cultivators are all the same people. As the sun sets behind the distant hills, the camp settles into quiet murmurs. The fire crackles gently. A child laughs quietly. The wind brushes through the wild grain, carrying the scent of the earth across the ancient plain. Their lives are simple, but not primitive. They are deeply knowledgeable, deeply skilled, deeply connected to the land. The world before farming is a world of balance, a world not yet shaped by fields or fences, a world where people moved lightly, yet left impressions that changed the course of human history. Göbekli Tepe stands as a monument to this delicate moment, not built by farmers, but by people whose hands were still rooted in the foraging world, and yet, through their shared rituals, their shared gatherings, and their shared labour, they unknowingly laid the foundations for agriculture, settlement, and civilization. The shift to farming would come later, but here, on this sacred hill, humanity's relationship with the land began to change. It began with footsteps in wild grain, with scattered seeds sprouting along well-worn paths, with gatherings that brought people together year after year, with rituals that encouraged cooperation. And slowly, through these quiet beginnings, the world that existed before farming would give rise to a new chapter, one shaped not merely by nature, but by human choice. The migrations that carried memory forward, long before borders existed, before villages claimed territory, before land belonged to anyone, people moved across the world as freely as the wind. Their footsteps followed the rhythms of animals, the flow of rivers, the shift of seasons. Migration was not an exception, it was life itself. And from the hill of Göbekli Tepe, memories travelled with them, carried in stories, in rituals, in seeds, and in the shared patterns of belief that stretched far beyond the stones. Imagine the world around Göbekli Tepe at the end of the last great ice age. The climate was warming, slowly but steadily. Glaciers retreated from distant mountains. Rivers swelled with meltwater. Grasslands expanded, drawing in herds of gazelle, aurochs, and wild sheep. The land was rich, inviting, full of possibility. People moved through it in small bands, their shelters light, their tools few, their hearts tied to the land's changing breath. The hill at Göbekli Tepe was not their home, not in the sense of permanent living, but it was their anchor, their meeting place, a spiritual and social centre woven into their cycles of movement. From this hill, paths radiated outward like the spokes of a great wheel, paths that led to distant valleys, rivers, mountains, and plains. Each path carried people away for a time, and each season carried them back again. Walk now with one of these groups as they depart in early spring. The air is cool, the grasses are still short, new shoots push through the soil, people take down the temporary shelters that circled the base of the sacred hill. Their belongings are simple and few: baskets, stone tools, animal skins, small carvings, gathered foods, and fire-hardened wooden spears. Children carry light bundles. Adults distribute weight evenly. Elders walk with quiet dignity, their steps steady and unhurried. They move together like a single organism, coordinated, aware, connected. Behind them, Göbekli Tepe rises gently against the sky. Its stones stand silently, their carved animals watching the departing group. The hill knows they will return when the seasons align, when the rituals call them back. As the people descend, the plain opens wide. To the north, rolling fields stretch toward distant mountains. To the east, dry plateaus dotted with wild pistachio trees catch the morning light. To the south, rivers snake through fertile valleys rich with wild grain. To the west, the land falls into open steppe, where herds move like currents of life. Every direction invites movement. Every path promises opportunity. Every journey carries memories outward. Migration for these people is not exile, it is tradition. It is the pulse of their world. As they travel, they follow the well-worn routes of their ancestors. Each bend in the terrain, each small spring of clear water, each grove of trees holds stories. They know which cliffs house eagle nests, which ravines lead to hidden streams, which valleys bloom after spring rains. And along these paths, they carry the memory of Göbekli Tepe. Not written memory, but something deeper. Memory held in songs, in rituals, in gestures passed from one generation to the next. Memory held in the stories they tell at night beside their fires. Listen to them as they settle at a seasonal encampment beside a river. The sun is low, the air is warm. Campfires crackle, sending glowing sparks into the dusk. Children fall asleep wrapped in animal skins. Adults carve tools, prepare meat, or sit quietly, watching shadows dance across the ground. Then an elder begins to speak. Her voice is low, steady. She speaks of the sacred hill, of the twin pillars that stand at its heart, of the fox carved into the stone, of the crane that stretches its wings, of the vulture that carries mysteries we no longer fully understand. She tells the story of the first hunters who built the great circles, of the spirits that dwell in stone, of the gathering place that binds all people, no matter how far they travel. The story is known to everyone here, but they listen as though hearing it for the first time. For these stories are not mere tales. They are maps of meaning, connecting people across time and distance. Stories are how migration carries memory forward. The next day, the group moves again. They head toward a region where wild wheat stands tall and thick, nurtured by rains and winter runoff. Here, they gather grains in great quantities, moving rhythmically through the fields. Their hands are skilled, their baskets filling steadily. They dry the grains in the sun, grind them on stones, share them in meals that strengthen their bonds. Some grains fall to the soil, some sprout, some flourish in the following season. Without realizing it, the people are shaping the land. Their migration patterns encourage growth. Their presence influences where plants thrive. Knowledge of these fertile valleys spreads slowly through the region. Groups meet at Göbekli Tepe and share what they have learned, which valleys flourished, which suffered drought, where herds moved early, where plants grew late. This exchange of information travels outward like a branching river of ideas. Migration carries not just people, but knowledge. Not just knowledge, but memory. Not just memory, but transformation. Imagine another group now, returning from the west. They arrive at the sacred hill after months away. Their clothes are worn from travel. Their baskets hold unfamiliar seeds, plants from distant plains. They bring new flint, new pigments, new stories, and when they gather in the stone circles, they share these stories with others, weaving them into the fabric of collective identity. Göbekli Tepe becomes a crossroads of migration, a place where ideas converge. A ritual from one valley becomes known in another. A tool-making technique spreads across regions. A belief shaped by one group finds new life among others. Through such exchanges, a cultural horizon stretches far beyond the hill, a shared worldview that reaches across ancient Anatolia. Migration does not separate people, it binds them. Walk now with a group moving toward the foothills to the north. They ascend rocky slopes, skilled in reading the terrain. From these heights, they spot herds grazing on green plateaus. They follow them, moving quietly, practicing patience that has been perfected over countless generations. Hunters work in coordinated teams, using signals, gestures, and instincts passed down through time. The hunt is successful. The group celebrates with gratitude. They roast meat over open flames, and around the fire they remember the rituals of the sacred hill. Perhaps they carve a small stone with a fox or a crane. Perhaps they retell the story of the twin pillars. Perhaps they sing songs that echo the ceremonies performed at Göbekli Tepe. And in these moments, memory travels. It does not stay fixed. It moves with them. It evolves with them. The people of Göbekli Tepe lived in a world defined by movement, yet their shared rituals and beliefs created a sense of unity that stretched across vast landscapes. They did not stay in one place, but their stories did. Migration shaped early humanity far more than settlement ever would. It connected distant valleys. It spread new ideas. It strengthened bonds between groups. It allowed traditions to flow like rivers across ancient Anatolia. And through migration, the memory of Göbekli Tepe, its stones, its symbols, its rituals, spread far beyond the hill itself, even after the enclosures were eventually buried, intentionally sealed beneath layers of earth. The ideas born there continued to echo for centuries. The people had moved on, but the memory of what they created travelled with them. It travelled in stories, in habits, in rituals, in the quiet understanding that community, cooperation, and meaning were stronger when shared. Migration carried more than footsteps across the land. It carried identity. It carried belief. It carried the seeds of new ways of living. And through these journeys, humanity stepped gradually toward a future where settlements would rise, fields would grow, and civilizations would form. But even as the world changed, the memory of the sacred hill remained. A whisper carried across generations, a presence felt in distant lands, a reminder of the first place where people gathered not just to survive, but to believe. The long burial of a sacred place. Long before the first cities rose from clay, before the earliest fields were ploughed, before the world settled into the rhythms of farming and permanent homes, a sacred hill stood above the plains of southeastern Anatolia. Göbekli Tepe, with its towering T-shaped pillars and circles of carved stone, had been the heartbeat of a vast region, a meeting place not owned by any one group, but held in trust by all who gathered there. For thousands of years, people had climbed its slopes carrying stories, tools, food, and the memories of those who came before them. They carved animals into limestone, shaped communal rituals, shared feasts that echoed beneath the stars, and reaffirmed their place in a world guided by movement and seasonal change. The hill was a sanctuary of ideas, a monument built before writing, before pottery, before farming, before almost everything we typically imagine when we picture early civilization. And then, slowly, something shifted. It didn't happen in a single season. It didn't begin with a sudden disaster or the arrival of a foreign people. It was quieter than that, a gradual transformation, unfolding year by year as the climate warmed and the land began to offer new possibilities. Wild grains grew thicker in the valleys, springs lasted longer, herds moved differently, people found themselves returning to certain locations again and again, tending the land in subtle ways without yet understanding they were laying the foundations for agriculture. Their lives were changing, their rhythms were changing, and because of this, their relationship with Göbekli Tepe began to change as well. The gatherings became less frequent, the great feasts smaller, the spaces that once rang with celebration now held long stretches of silence. People still respected the hill, deeply, fiercely, instinctively, but it was no longer the centre of their world. New centres were emerging, early settlements, semi-permanent camps, patches of land where wild wheat flourished under human hands. The sacred hill was shifting into a memory, even while it still stood in plain sight. But the people did not abandon Göbekli Tepe. They could not. Its symbols lived inside them. Its stories had shaped them. Its stones held the spirit of generations. To leave it exposed to decay would have been a violation of everything they believed. And so, in an act unmatched in ancient history, they chose to bury the sacred hill. The decision came not from crisis, but from reverence. It was not a retreat, not a surrender, not an erasure. It was an honouring, a deliberate gesture of closure, a way of safeguarding their sanctuary as the world shifted around them. The burial began gently. A group arrived at dawn, carrying baskets of soil gathered from the surrounding slopes. The first light of morning touched the tops of the pillars, illuminating the carvings one last time. The fox poised as if mid-step, the crane with his outstretched wings, the serpent winding across stone. The people stood in silence, watching the light pass across the faces of the carvings, aware that soon the sun would no longer reach them. The first basket of soil was poured with careful hands. Earth touched stone softly, almost tenderly, a gesture of protection, not destruction. More people came. They carried not only soil, but fragments of daily life, broken stone bowls, chipped blades, bones from shared meals, flint from tool making. These objects were not refuse, they were offerings, woven into the burial to preserve the memory of the world that had grown around the hill. Layer by layer, the enclosures filled. The pillars sank slowly into darkness, embraced by rising walls of earth. What had once been open sky above the stones became a smooth, sloping hill. Wind no longer touched the carvings. Morning light no longer reached them. The burial did not happen quickly. It took years, perhaps centuries. Each generation returned to add more earth, more offerings, more layers of memory. Children were born, who never saw the pillars in the sunlight. They knew the site only through stories told by their elders, stories that grew softer and more symbolic with each passing season. The physical form of the hill faded, but the meaning remained, carried in ritual gestures, in stone symbols, in the way people touched the earth as they worked, hunted and gathered. Eventually, the last enclosure was filled. The final stones disappeared beneath the soil. The hill rose smooth and rounded, no longer betraying the presence of the ancient sanctuary beneath. Grass covered it, wildflowers rooted in the soft earth. Animals grazed along its slopes. What remained on the surface was an ordinary hill, quiet, unremarkable, blending into the landscape, while beneath it slept one of humanity's earliest monumental achievements, protected by the very people who built it. Generations passed, cultures changed, agriculture spread across the region, villages became towns, rituals evolved into new forms, stories became myth, then faded altogether. Shepherds walked their flocks across the mound, unaware of the carved stones beneath their feet. Farmers ploughed nearby fields, never suspecting the oldest temple in the world lay beneath the soil. Travellers passed without a second glance. Göbekli Tepe slept for thousands of years, preserved completely because of the care with which it had been buried. Then, in modern times, the earth finally opened again. A farmer's plough struck stone. Archaeologists arrived. As layer after layer of fill was removed, the stones emerged as though waking from a dream, intact, sharp, unmarred by erosion. The burial had worked perfectly. The site had been sealed like a time capsule, untouched since the last people placed earth over the stones more than 10 millennia earlier. For the first time in human memory, the pillars saw the sky again. What the ancient builders preserved has become one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. A message carried intact across ages, a gift from a world far older than any written history. Göbekli Tepe was not lost by accident. It was hidden with intention, not destroyed, but protected, not abandoned, but allowed to rest. The long burial of the sacred hill stands as one of the most extraordinary acts of reverence ever performed by early humanity. A gesture so complete, so deliberate, so meaningful that it preserved the world's first monumental sanctuary until the time came for it to be discovered again. Rediscovery beneath a quiet hill. For thousands of years the hill slept beneath drifting soil and quiet winds. Seasons washed across its surface like gentle waves, spring grasses rising and falling, winter frost settling lightly upon the mound, rain carving soft channels along its sides. To anyone who passed, the hill was simply another feature in the rolling landscape of southeastern Anatolia, a place where shepherds paused to rest, a place where children climbed its slope for fun, a place that held no secrets, or so it seemed. But beneath that quiet surface, just a few feet below the roots of wild grasses, an ancient world waited in perfect darkness, a world of stone circles, carved pillars, and forgotten rituals, sealed away for more than 10 millennia. Göbekli Tepe slept, and the earth guarded it faithfully. The people who buried the great enclosures had done their work so carefully, so deliberately, that the stones remained intact long after their names and stories faded into myth. The carvings survived without weather, the pillars remained upright, even the delicate lines etched into their surfaces, that fox in mid-step, that crane stretching its wings, waited like preserved memories held just beneath the skin of the world. And then, in the late 20th century, the silence finally shifted. The rediscovery began not with a grand expedition, nor with the planned efforts of a major institution, but with something far simpler, a farmer moving across his field. His plough struck a fragment of carved limestone. It looked nothing like a natural rock. Its edges were smooth, its face curved in a way that suggested human hands. He picked it up, puzzled, turning it over beneath the sunlight. He couldn't have known it yet, but the piece he was holding had been shaped thousands of years before the pyramids, thousands of years before writing, thousands of years before even the earliest known farming villages. It belonged to a world no one had seen in 11,000 years. That small discovery eventually reached the hands of archaeologists at the Schönlöfer Museum, and in 1994 a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the site. He climbed the quiet mound, walked its surface, looked at the scattered stone fragments, and froze. He had seen stones like these before. He recognized the shape of ancient tool marks. He recognized the curve of limestone carved with intention. He recognized the possibility that the mound was not natural at all. Standing on that windswept hill, he felt a sense of certainty so deep it was almost instinctive. Göbekli Tepe was not a simple rise in the earth. It was built, it was intentional, and it was unimaginably old. He would later describe that moment as the turning point of his life. Slowly, carefully, excavations began. Workers removed soil in thin layers, brushing gently, documenting meticulously, as though unwrapping a fragile gift whose contents might vanish if disturbed too quickly. They expected to find houses, hearths, or pottery, perhaps an early village. But what emerged was something the world had never seen before. The first pillars rose from the earth like the bones of a forgotten giant, broad, smooth, T-shaped stones, their tops widening toward the sky. As the soil fell away, more of the limestone surface appeared, and then, suddenly, a carved animal emerged from the darkness. A fox, frozen mid-stride, then a serpent coiling across stone, then a crane with wings outstretched, then a boar, a lion, a vulture. It was not a village, it was a sanctuary, a temple older than the invention of agriculture, a gathering place built before permanent homes, a monumental structure created by hunter-gatherers who had no cities, no writing, no metal tools, yet possessed vision, organisation, and skill far beyond what anyone had believed possible. The pillars were massive, some weighing more than 10 tons, yet the people of Göbekli Tepe had quarried them, shaped them, transported them, and raised them with astonishing precision. Around each pair of central pillars, stone circles formed enclosed spaces, their walls carefully smoothed, their entrances aligned with purpose. Nothing about the site suggested randomness. Everything whispered intention. Everything implied meaning. As excavation deepened, archaeologists discovered something even more astonishing. The entire site had been intentionally buried. The fill wasn't wind-blown dust or collapsed debris. It was man-made, layered with soil, stone fragments, broken tools, animal bones, and remnants of ancient feasts. The burial was too uniform, too extensive, too deliberate to be natural. Göbekli Tepe had been sealed intentionally by the same people who built it, which meant the people who created this extraordinary sanctuary had chosen, for reasons still unknown, to wrap it in earth like a final offering, preserving it for a future they would never know. Every pillar uncovered added another layer to the mystery. Every carving deepened the unanswered questions. Every circle revealed the complexity of a society previously thought too simple to achieve such things. The timeline of human civilization began to shift, bending backward into deeper antiquity. The story we once believed, that agriculture gave rise to complex structures, no longer held. Göbekli Tepe showed the opposite. It suggested that ritual gathering, shared ceremony, and symbolic meaning might have inspired farming, not the other way around. As more enclosures appeared beneath the soil, researchers realized the scale of the site was far greater than the excavated area. Ground-penetrating radar revealed additional circles still buried on the hillside, untouched since the Stone Age. Layer upon layer, enclosure upon enclosure, an entire hidden world lay beneath the mound, and all of it was older than anything previously known. Göbekli Tepe became a turning point in understanding human origins, a doorway through which modern people glimpsed the spiritual imagination of a world that existed long before recorded time. The air around the excavation site felt different. Even workers and archaeologists described a strange sense of presence, of uncovering something that had been waiting deliberately, patiently, for thousands of years, as though the hill itself exhaled slowly each time a pillar touched the sun again. And as dust settled on the newly revealed stones, one thing became clear. Göbekli Tepe had not simply been rediscovered, it had been awakened. Its pillars stood once more beneath the open sky, carrying with them the stories of people whose names we will never know, but whose vision shaped the earliest foundations of human culture. And now, after more than 10,000 years of sleep, the ancient sanctuary was ready to speak again, through the symbols carved into its stone, through the mysteries embedded in its design, through the echoes of the gatherings that once filled its circles with life. What those echoes reveal, what wisdom survives from the builders of the world's first temple, belongs to the final part of this journey. Echoes of the world's first temple builders. Long after the last footstep faded from the stone circles on the hill, long after the final ritual fire dimmed to ash, Göbekli Tepe settled slowly into silence, and in that silence, Time began its long, unbroken drift. Winds picked up dust from the surrounding plains, laying it gently across the abandoned enclosures. Rains softened the earth. Seasons turned with patient repetition. Grass grew, roots curled, animals roamed over the mound with no awareness of what lay beneath their hooves. The people who had shaped the pillars were gone not only from the hill, but from the land itself. Their presence spread thin across the passing centuries. Yet what they carried with them did not vanish. It unfurled quietly into the world like a breath released into air, travelling through generations not as stories, not as legends, not as names passed from parent to child, but as something deeper, an imprint on the human mind. Those early communities did not leave behind a spoken history, but they left something more enduring, a way of gathering, a way of imagining, a way of understanding their place within a world full of animals, spirits, cycles, and unknowns. As the Ice Age loosened its grip and the climate softened, the descendants of Göbekli Tepe's builders wandered through new landscapes. They followed herds across valleys, harvested wild grains along the slopes, and returned season after season to places that felt familiar. In their movements, faint echoes of the hill-shaped rituals remained. Their worldview had already been shaped by the shared experiences of gathering within stone circles, of carving animals with intention, of facing the mysteries of the world together. Even without the physical sight, they carried with them patterns of thought. When these communities eventually began to settle, forming the earliest semi-permanent villages, they did not begin from nothing. Their shelters may have changed shape, but their sense of space did not. At the centre of several early settlements across the Fertile Crescent, archaeologists found buildings that were not homes, spaces too large, too carefully arranged, too symbolically decorated to belong to a single family. These were communal spaces, places where people gathered for reasons beyond daily survival. And though these spaces looked different from the great stone circles on the hill, they reflected the same principle, that humans needed a place to come together and confront the unseen. The echoes grew more distinct as time passed. In the earliest farming communities of the region, stone figures appeared, abstracted humans with hands folded, with serene faces, with postures suggesting reverence or presence. Though smaller and more intimate than the towering pillars of Göbekli Tepe, they carried the same essence, to represent something beyond the individual. Symbols continued to evolve. Instead of great open enclosures under the sky, communities built enclosed sacred rooms. Instead of massive animal reliefs, they carved small figurines. Instead of gathering only seasonally, they met more frequently as villages grew. But the spiritual architecture, the idea that there should be a designated place where people faced mysteries together, remained unchanged. It is here, in these quiet changes, that Göbekli Tepe's influence becomes unmistakable. The world's first farmers were not emerging from a cultural vacuum. They were inheriting a worldview created by people who had spent thousands of years practicing ceremony, carving meaning into stone, and gathering in circles shaped with intention. Agriculture may have transformed survival, but ritual had already transformed the mind. In this way, the legacy of Göbekli Tepe was not limited to stones and carvings. It lived on in the human impulse to gather, to build spaces set apart from the ordinary, to express ideas through symbols, to seek connection with something larger than oneself. The builders of Göbekli Tepe did not leave behind a mythic system that later cultures directly copied. Their influence was not literal, it was foundational. It was the seed from which the earliest shared beliefs grew. As centuries passed, those seeds took root. Villages became larger, communities became more organised. Daily life settled around permanent hearths rather than seasonal paths. And with stability came new questions, new needs, new rituals. People gathered not only for survival, but for celebration, mourning, initiation, and remembrance. They told stories of ancestors and spirits. They crafted early cosmologies. They began to look at the sky not only as a source of weather, but as a place of patterns and meaning. All of this formed the prelude to civilization. Long before the first city rose, long before writing emerged, long before kings carved their names into stone monuments, a quieter transformation had already taken place. The transformation of how humans thought about themselves, about each other, and about the unseen world. It is this transformation that echoes from Göbekli Tepe. Though the pillars lay buried, though the builders moved on, though the world changed beyond anything they could imagine, the essence of their gathering endured. It lived within every shared ritual, every communal structure, every symbol carved into early pottery or stone. Even the burial of Göbekli Tepe itself, the deliberate covering of the enclosures with soil, carried forward as an instinctive act in later cultures. To bury something sacred was to protect it, to honour it, to complete its purpose. In later ancient societies, sacred objects and temples were sometimes ritually closed or sealed, just as the stone circles had been. The gesture itself had roots deeper than any recorded tradition, and so the echoes continued, soft, subtle, quiet, but persistent. Even after the world's first cities rose in Mesopotamia, even after temples of brick and stone soared above the plains, even after kings and priests claimed new roles as interpreters of the divine, the echoes of that early hilltop sanctuary still lived beneath the surface of all things. Göbekli Tepe had been the first great expression of human symbolic intelligence, the first architecture of belief, the first monumental space created for meaning rather than shelter. And long after it was buried, humanity kept returning, again and again, to the same instinct, to carve, to gather, to imagine, to face the mysteries together. These echoes carried forward into the oldest myths, the oldest rituals, the oldest sacred centres of later civilizations. Their forms changed, but their roots remained. For the people who carved the first pillars on that hill had set something in motion, something vast, something enduring, something that shaped the human journey long after their own footsteps faded from the earth. As the buried stones of Göbekli Tepe remained hidden beneath the quiet hill, the echoes of its builders wandered far across the ancient world. Thousands of years slipped by, entire ages rising and fading, yet the impulse that shaped the stone circles continued to flow through the way humans formed their earliest beliefs. The people who once carved the foxes and cranes may never have known the magnitude of what they were beginning, but the world they set in motion unfolded like a slow sunrise. Communities across Anatolia began building ritual spaces inside their villages, rooms with platforms, decorated walls, and objects placed with intention. The pillars of Göbekli Tepe had been grand and open to the sky, but now rituals moved inward, becoming woven into daily life. Over generations, these communal rooms became more defined, more symbolic, more powerful within the social structure of each settlement. People gathered there not only for ceremony, but for decisions, negotiations, shared feasts, and moments of transition. The idea that a community needed a centre, a heart, a place for connection, this had taken root deep within human culture. As the centuries continued, the echoes travelled even farther. Across the plains of Mesopotamia, people began shaping clay into bricks and raising the earliest temple platforms. They carried forward the same instinct to elevate sacred space, to mark it distinctly from the surrounding homes. In the valley of the Nile, early shrines appeared that mirrored the orientation towards celestial cycles. In the Levant, stone-built sanctuaries rose near springs, caves and hilltops, places where nature and spirit felt intertwined. None of these cultures knew Göbekli Tepe, and yet all of them reflected a pattern that had first appeared in those buried circles. The builders of the world's earliest sanctuary had left behind a blueprint not of stone, but of thinking, a blueprint of how humans relate to meaning, to each other, to the unseen. In later millennia, mythology blossomed from these foundations. The earliest stories of sky gods, earth mothers, hero ancestors, and animal spirits echoed the animal reliefs carved on Göbekli Tepe's pillars. Serpents, cranes, boars, foxes, all found their places in mythology across ancient cultures, whether as symbols of wisdom, guardians of thresholds, or messengers between realms. The animals of the Stone Age continued to walk through human imagination long after the quarrying of the last limestone block. As cities emerged, rituals became more structured. Priests, storytellers, and leaders began to shape ceremonies with new layers of meaning. But beneath these developments, a familiar rhythm persisted, the idea that the community gathered together to face the mysteries of life: birth, death, harvest, storms, illness, changing seasons. All were occasions for collective reflection rooted in an instinct older than memory. Even burial practices echoed those early stones. The act of sealing the enclosures beneath earth, of preserving something sacred by placing it into darkness, appeared again and again across time. Tombs, sealed chambers, funerary mounds, all carried the essence of protection, reverence, and transition. In this way, the people of Göbekli Tepe did not vanish, they simply dissolved into the fabric of civilization. Their spirit lived on in the alignment of ancient temples, in the arrangement of communal squares, in the way people constructed the boundaries between sacred and everyday space. It lived on in the instinct to carve symbols into stone, not only to honour the present, but to outlast it. It lived on in the decision to build centres of gathering long before writing, government, or law. And when Göbekli Tepe was rediscovered in modern times, it was as though a forgotten voice had returned to speak again. The stones, untouched by millennia, rose from the earth with their carvings intact, their presence undimmed by time. They stood once more under open sky, no longer hidden, no longer silent. Their re-emergence invited the world to reconsider the origins of humanity, not as a straight line from simple to complex, but as a tapestry woven with threads of imagination from the very beginning. Even now, visitors who walk among the pillars describe a feeling that is hard to explain, a sense of stepping into a place that existed before everything else, a place that remembers even when humans do not. The air feels older, heavier, yet peaceful. The stones hold their stillness like guardians of a knowledge that predates cities, predates farming, predates history itself. And perhaps this is the truest echo of the world's first temple builders, that across more than 11,000 years, their work still touches the human heart in a way that cannot be fully explained, only felt. Their footsteps are gone, but their presence remains. Their voices are lost, but their vision endures. Their sanctuary is silent, but the echo it set in motion continues to ring softly through every culture that came after. And so the story of Göbekli Tepe ends not with disappearance, but with return, a return of memory, a return of wonder, a return of the ancient understanding that meaning is something made together. The echo continues even now, across time, across culture, across the quiet spaces where humans still gather to face the mysteries of existence. Their legacy lives on. As the last echoes of Göbekli Tepe drift into the quiet, we return gently to the present. Across millennia, the voices of the world's first temple builders reach us still, softly, patiently, reminding us that long before cities or writing, humans were already searching for meaning together. Thank you for journeying across deep time with me tonight. If you'd like more peaceful explorations of ancient history, feel free to like the video, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Until our next story, rest well, and may the ancient world stay with you in the calm of your dreams.